I think there's so many fucking powerful people that are on those lists. There's so many powerful people that went and partied. Air quotes, partied. And how many of them went to the Diddy parties? Have you been paying attention to the trial?
Oh, yeah.
Trials.
Something just shifted behind the scenes, and Hollywood can feel it. Not the loud, messy kind of scandal that trends for a weekend and disappears. This one feels quiet, calculated, and dangerous. The kind where phones go silent, lawyers get busy, and people who never log off suddenly vanish. And when Joe Rogan and 50 Cent start hinting at what's coming next, that silence gets even louder. Joe didn't shout or rant, which somehow made it worse. He spoke calmly, like someone who already knows how the story ends. His pauses felt heavier than accusations, like he was choosing words carefully because the truth carries weight. It sounded less like speculation and more like a warning. The kind that says, you think you've seen chaos. But that was just the warm dash up. Then 50 Cent laughed, and that's when the mood really changed. Because his laugh isn't humor, it's confirmation. It's the sound of someone who's watched the industry protect people until it suddenly doesn't. He didn't drop names, but he didn't need to. His confidence said enough to make a few powerful people uncomfortable. The internet caught on immediately. This wasn't about one scandal anymore. This was about patterns, cover-ups, and secrets that have been sitting in plain sight. And now the question isn't who's guilty. It's who's next. Joe Rogan didn't raise his voice, and that's exactly why people leaned closer. When Joe gets loud, it's entertainment. When he gets quiet, it's information. This time, his tone wasn't curious, it was measured. Like someone choosing words carefully because he already knows where the story ends. He wasn't speculating, he was signaling. And Hollywood felt it immediately. He talked about patterns, not people. About how powerful figures rarely fall from one mistake, but from years of silence stacked on top of each other. Fame, according to Joe, isn't protection, it's insulation. It keeps heat inside until the pressure has nowhere else to go. And when that insulation finally cracks, the explosion doesn't just hit one person. It hits everyone standing too close. Then came the pauses. Those dangerous pauses where Joe usually fills the air with jokes. But this time didn't. He let the silence do the talking. Fans noticed it instantly. This wasn't a podcast ramble. This felt like restraint. Like there were names sitting on his tongue that he chose not to say, not because he couldn't, but because timing matters. That's when 50 Cent entered the conversation and changed the temperature completely. If Joe was the calm before the storm, 50 was the lightning smile right before impact. He didn't sound shocked or confused. He sounded entertained. And when someone like 50 Cent is entertained by chaos, it usually means he's seen the script already. 50 didn't talk like a fan or an outsider. He talked like someone who understands how the machine works. He made it clear that the industry doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes quietly, behind contracts, NDAs, and carefully crafted public images. Everyone knows something. But nobody says anything until saying nothing becomes too expensive. What really rattled people wasn't what 50 said. It was how comfortable he sounded saying it. He joked about loyalty having an expiration date. About how friendships disappear the second a headline turns negative.
He wasn't exaggerating for laughs. He was describing standard operating procedure.
And the audience could tell this wasn't theory. It was experience. The phrase worse than Diddy didn't come out dramatic, it came out casual. And that's what made it dangerous. Worse doesn't mean louder, it means deeper. It means more people involved, more years covered up, more silence bought and paid for. Worse means the kind of exposure that doesn't. And with an apology video. The internet reacted faster than any newsroom ever could. Clips were clipped, pauses were analyzed, laughter was decoded. People weren't asking what happened, they were asking who knew. That shift matters. Because when the question changes from events to awareness, accountability follows close behind. Almost immediately, certain celebrities went quiet. Not taking a break, quiet, but strategic quiet. Posts stopped. Comments disappeared. Interviews were delayed. This wasn't coincidence, it was containment. Anyone who understands PR could see the playbook unfolding in real time. Joe dropped another subtle line that most casual listeners missed. He said the public only sees what it's allowed to see. That sentence didn't sound dramatic, but it carried weight. Because Hollywood isn't built on transparency, it's built on permission. Stories don't surface unless someone powerful lets them. That's where the discomfort really started. Because if permission is changing hands, it means protection is shifting. Someone who used to be covered might no longer be worth covering. And when protection moves, people get exposed, not because they're suddenly guilty, but because they're suddenly expendable. 50 Cent leaned into that idea with his signature sarcasm. He joked that people think money makes them untouchable, when in reality it just makes the fall louder. Big names don't disappear quietly. They crash. And crashes draw attention, lawsuits, and receipts. Fans began digging through old interviews and resurfacing awkward moments that never made sense before. Jokes that aged poorly. Stories that sounded fake even back then. Things that were laughed off as rumors suddenly felt heavier. Context changes everything. And context was shifting fast. The narrative stopped being about one scandal and started looking like a chain reaction. One exposure leads to another. One name brings up three more. And suddenly people start realizing how small the industry really is. Everyone overlaps. Everyone shares rooms, managers, lawyers, and silence. What made this moment different was the lack of denial. Nobody came out swinging against the claims. Nobody confidently shut it down. That kind of silence doesn't usually mean innocence, it means strategy. Waiting it out. Hoping the internet moves on to the next distraction. Joe and 50 both made it clear that this wasn't going to blow over quickly. Joe hinted that timelines matter more than headlines. 50 suggested that once the dam breaks, it doesn't close again. Together, they painted a picture of an industry bracing for impact. Not reacting to rumors. At this stage, fans weren't just watching anymore. They were anticipating, waiting for the first real name to drop, waiting for confirmation that the hints weren't empty. Anticipation is dangerous because it turns speculation into expectation. And expectation demands payoff. This wasn't about cancel culture or gossip anymore. It was about power and accountability colliding in public. About who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. And the scariest part was realizing that the people speaking sounded like they knew exactly how it would play out once the conversation went public. Hollywood lost control of the narrative overnight. This is always the most dangerous phase, when whispers turn into expectations. Joe Rogan and 50 Cent didn't give people facts, they gave them confidence. And confidence is more powerful than evidence on the internet. The moment that happened, damage control became impossible. Memes were the first warning sign that things had escalated. Not playful jokes, but sharp, uncomfortable humor. People joked that celebrity lawyers were working overtime and assistants were suddenly on vacation. When humor turns this specific, it means fear has already settled in. Memes are how the internet tests the temperature before the fire spreads. Then came the silence, and it was louder than any denial. Celebrities who posted daily suddenly disappeared. Comments were turned off like lights in a room someone didn't want searched. Interviews were postponed with vague excuses. The absence of noise became its own message. And people noticed immediately. Joe's audience picked up on something else too. His confidence didn't waver as backlash started brewing. Usually, when speculation gets wild, people backpedal. Joe didn't. His tone stayed calm, steady, almost patient. That kind of patience doesn't come from guessing. It comes from knowing the clock is already ticking. 50 Cent, on the other hand, leaned into the chaos with surgical precision.
He joked, but every joke landed like a warning shot.
He talked about loyalty disappearing faster than money in a bad deal. He reminded everyone that friendships in the industry are conditional, not emotional. When the headlines turn ugly, survival beats loyalty every time. Pop culture comparisons flooded the conversation. People said this scandal arc felt bigger than reality TV, messier than true crime, and more layered than a Marvel crossover. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a suspect list. And everyone believed they were closer to the truth than the media. Twitter threads exploded into full-blown investigations. Old interviews were pulled apart line by line. Jokes that once sounded harmless were now reinterpreted as red flags. Stories that never quite made sense suddenly felt rehearsed. Context transformed comedy into suspicion overnight. Media outlets played their usual cautious game. Headlines avoided names but leaned heavily into implication. Words like sources, Industry insiders and long-standing rumors did all the talking. This wasn't journalism chasing truth. It was journalism preparing the audience for impact. A soft launch for something harder to swallow later. Some celebrities made the worst possible move by overreacting. Unnecessary statements appeared, filled with defensive language no one asked for. The moment someone says, "I have nothing to do with this," the internet asks why they felt the need to say it. Silence raises eyebrows, but panic confirms suspicion. Inside the industry, subtle lines were being drawn. Indirect posts appeared, thinly veiled shade was thrown, and old rivalries resurfaced. People weren't defending anyone directly, but they were positioning themselves. When camps start forming, it means people expect fallout. Nobody chooses sides unless they think something real is coming. Joe dropped another quiet line that changed the tone completely. He said, "When one secret breaks, it weakens the rest." That wasn't philosophy, it was mechanics. NDAs only work when everyone believes they will. Once one cracks, the others start looking less permanent. 50 Cent translated that idea into blunt language. He said people assume big names are safer, when in reality they're louder targets. When small names fall, it's quiet. When giants fall, everyone feels the tremor. And tremors attract investigators, lawsuits, and witnesses. By this point, the audience had stopped reacting and started waiting. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting for a name. Waiting for the first domino to tip. Anticipation replaced shock, and anticipation is dangerous. Because it turns curiosity into demand. Online discourse shifted from, "if this is real," to "who's first." That's a psychological point of no return. Once the crowd believes exposure is inevitable, everyone becomes suspicious. Even innocence starts to look like camouflage. And that's when paranoia spreads faster than facts. Hollywood hates uncertainty more than bad press. Bad press can be managed, rewritten, softened. Uncertainty can't, because nobody knows which direction it will break. Every meeting, every call, every delayed statement feels heavier. People start thinking less about careers and more about survival. Joe's refusal to walk anything back made things worse for those hoping this would fade. He didn't deny interpretations. He didn't clarify intent. He let the audience sit with the discomfort. That silence acted like confirmation for many. Whether fair or not, 0.50 cents laughter became its own symbol. Not the laugh of someone joking, but the laugh of someone watching inevitability play out. The kind of laugh that says, "I've seen this movie before." And in that movie, the ending is never clean. At this stage, speculation had outgrown its origins. The story wasn't about Joe Rogan or 50 Cent anymore. It was about the idea that something rotten had been protected for too long. That fame had delayed accountability, not erased it. And that delay was finally running out. The most unsettling part was that nobody credible rushed to shut it down. No aggressive denials. No confident dismissals. Just silence, strategy, and distance. In Hollywood, that combination usually means preparation, not innocence. Once the tension peaked, the industry stopped pretending this was just noise. Quiet shifts started happening behind closed doors. Meetings were rescheduled, calls were rerouted, and certain names stopped being mentioned altogether. This wasn't panic yet, it was preparation. Hollywood knows the difference between a rumor cycle and a structural crack. And this felt like the second one. Reputations began taking damage before any official exposure even landed. That's the part nobody talks about. In the court of public perception, suspicion alone can rewrite a legacy. People started adding allegedly to conversations that never needed it before. Careers don't always end with proof. Sometimes they end with doubt. Relationships were the next casualty. Longtime collaborators suddenly went in a different direction. Friends who once defended each other stopped interacting publicly. Silence replaced loyalty, and distance became the new strategy. When the smoke gets thick, everyone wants to make sure they're standing far enough away to claim they never smelled it. Joe Rogan stayed exactly where he was, calm and unmoved by the storm he helped create. He didn't celebrate, and he didn't backtrack. That consistency made his message feel heavier with time. He let people realize the implications on their own, which somehow made everything feel more real than a direct accusation ever could. 50 Cent. Meanwhile, treated the fallout like a case study. He joked about how quickly people switch sides when self-preservation kicks in.
He reminded everyone that power structures only look solid until pressure exposes the cracks.
His sarcasm wasn't cruel, it was observational. Like someone narrating a predictable ending, behind the scenes, legal teams became the busiest people in the room. Contracts were reviewed. Old agreements resurfaced. NDAs that once felt permanent suddenly felt fragile. The fear wasn't about one leak, it was about a chain reaction. Because once one person talks, others realize they can too. Public perception shifted from curiosity to judgment. Fans stopped asking what happened and started asking who should be held accountable. That's a dangerous transition. Accountability doesn't wait for full information, it demands response. And response is the one thing Hollywood struggles with when the story isn't fully under control. Some celebrities attempted soft rebrands overnight. Charity posts appeared. Family-focused interviews popped up. Spiritual language made a comeback. These moves weren't subtle, and that was the problem. When image management becomes obvious, it starts looking like distraction. Not sincerity, others chose disappearance, betting on short attention spans and new distractions. That strategy works when the internet is bored. It fails when the audience feels invested. This time people weren't bored. They felt like they were watching the beginning of something bigger than one headline. What made the moment feel irreversible was the loss of trust. Even innocent parties felt the ripple effects. When an industry is built on perception, any crack threatens everyone standing on it. Studios hesitated. Brands paused partnerships. Risk became something no one wanted to explain to shareholders. Joe hinted that history repeats itself in cycles, not events. Scandals don't clean systems, they expose them. The real damage isn't who falls, it's what people realize about how long things were allowed to stand. That realization lingers longer than any breaking news banner. 50 Cent drove that point home in his own way. He said the loudest downfall isn't always the most important one. Sometimes the quiet aftermath changes behavior more than any headline ever could. Fear teaches lessons that morality never managed to. The audience started noticing how narratives were being rewritten in real time. Old success stories were reframed. Achievements were re-examined through a different lens. The question shifted from how did they get here to what did it cost? That's not a comfortable question for an industry built on admiration. What followed wasn't closure, it was awareness. Awareness that fame delays consequences, but doesn't erase them. Awareness that silence isn't innocence, it's often strategy. An awareness that some truths don't explode. They leak slowly until everything smells different. By now, curiosity had turned into vigilance. People weren't just waiting for the next name, they were watching patterns. Who speaks? Who disappears? Who suddenly changes tone? Once people learn how to read behavior, they stopped needing confirmation. Joe Rogan and 50 Cent didn't need to say anything else. The message had already landed. They weren't positioning themselves as heroes or judges. They acted more like observers who knew the ending long before the audience caught up. The industry entered a defensive posture. But defense only works when the threat is external. This threat came from within. From history. From habits. From silence that had lasted too long. And internal threats are always harder to contain. As the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't the end of a scandal, it was the beginning of a shift. A reminder that power depends on permission, and permission can be revoked. Once that idea takes hold, nothing feels untouchable anymore. Part 03 closes without a neat ending. Because real consequences don't wrap themselves up cleanly. They linger. They change behavior. They haunt conversations long after headlines move on. And the people who thought they were safe are now learning the difference between being famous and being protected. Because exposure doesn't always arrive with sirens and spotlights. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and by the time you notice it, the damage is already done. And let's be real, if you made it this far, you already know this story isn't over. This wasn't closure, this was a warning shot. Hollywood doesn't clean itself. It waits to be exposed, and when it happens fast. Today it's hints and whispers. Tomorrow it's headlines and lawyers sprinting like It's leg day. Now don't sit there acting surprised like this came out of nowhere. These scandals don't fall from the sky, they marinate for years. Fame delays consequences, it doesn't delete them. And if you think this is the last name we're talking about, you haven't been paying attention at all. So do me a favor and smash that like button like it owes you money. Hit it like a contract that suddenly stopped protecting someone. Because every like tells the algorithm you want the truth, not the polished fairy tale version they sell on red carpets. Drop a comment too. Because I already know you've got theories. Who do you think is next? Who's been moving weird lately? Who went quiet a little too fast? Say it out loud, because silence is how this mess lasted so long in the first place. And if you're new here, subscribe right now. Not later. Not after the next scandal breaks. Right now. Because when the next exposure hits, you don't want to be hearing about it secondhand like it's old news. We don't chase headlines here. We see them coming. Headlines here. We see them coming. This channel doesn't do celebrity worship. We do pattern recognition. We don't wait for permission to talk. And we don't pretend power makes people innocent. Scandals drop constantly here. And when they do, we break them down without filters, without fear. And without favors. This is Fame Blueprint, where clout gets decoded. Silence gets questioned. And the truth never needs permission.